So, hey, I'm Lisa Karlin Curtis. Thanks so much for coming to my talk today, all about using transparency as a superpower. So I am the technical lead at Incident.io. We build incident management tooling for your whole organization. And we spend a lot of time thinking about what great incident culture looks like. I'm here to try and share a bit of that and chat a little bit about transparency and how we can use that in our teams to make a really, really good incident culture. I'm also on Twitter for as long as it's still around at @paprikatieng. If you'd like to check me out, I'd love to see you there. Yeah, let's get started. I'll probably talk for about 20 minutes and then the rest of the time we'll be there. I don't know if we've got a way of kind of feeding like a Q&A through, but we'll figure that out at the end. I'm not too worried.
Yeah, if I can just one word of comment. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can put them in a Q&A section, and then we will answer them at the end because we have dedicated time for that. So that's all from me. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, and also just like, thank you so much for having me, Glovo. I think hopefully this is going to be good fun. So we're going to start with Atlassian because recency bias, and also I think it's kind of an interesting example here. So in April, Atlassian had quite a big outage. A few hundred customers experienced a complete blackout across all their Atlassian services after a migration went badly wrong. And it was one of those weird outages where most people were fine and a handful of people were like completely dark. So the news started to leak onto Twitter and, well, people were angry, like really, really angry in a way that only people on Twitter really can be. And Atlassian's comms were really poor. There was no public acknowledgement. Their Twitter was totally silent, and their public status page kept sending the same vague update over and over again. We continue to work on the defined processes for the resolution of the issues impacting blah, 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 right? Not really helping anybody. This lasted for about a week. And over that week, everybody on social media got more and more angry and riled each other up, as we all do. And then something quite significantly changed. So the CTO wrote up this long article explaining what had gone wrong, why it was taking them so long to fix it, giving really clear timelines about when customers could expect what services to be restored. And it turned out that what had happened is that Atlassian was having to manually restore data for each of these affected organizations, or in the words of nursery rhyme, put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And as engineers, that is one of all of our worst nightmares. There were still lots of questions. Why was such a dangerous script allowed to run at all? Why was it taking so long to restore the service? Could Atlassian have softened the blow by maybe giving customers access to the data in another way, or prioritizing certain critical services like Opsgenie, their paging platform? But the tone of the conversation had completely changed. The vitriol and anger that had preceded it was replaced with understanding and empathy for the engineers who were desperately working to resolve the situation, alongside some good old armchair SRE speculation about exactly what had happened. This wasn't an evil organization being unkind or negligent. It was some humans who made a mistake and were moving heaven and earth to try and fix it as fast as they could. So just for one more story before we get cracking. Like many engineers, I've spent a lot of time in incidents about databases. We had one afternoon where our database started to complain. Lots of alerts were firing, our API calls were getting slower, and our queue latencies were out of control. We declared an incident and started investigating. There's lots of noise, it's kind of hard to see what's going on, so we started scaling down workers, trying to just remove any unnecessary load, while some other members of the team were trying to understand what the underlying cause of the slowdown was. Presumably there was some bad query somewhere, but we didn't know where it was. As we scaled down our queues, the metrics started improving. High fives all around. Great work, team. But after another few minutes, the graphs changed direction again. The database was deteriorating, and quite quickly, we were back to where we'd started. It took us a few minutes to work out where the new database load had come from. After about 15 minutes of digging around, we worked out that someone was running a really expensive backfill from a console. We asked them to kill the job, and lo and behold, the database immediately started to recover. During the chaos, no one had remembered to send any comms to the rest of the engineering team. The engineer running the backfill had no idea anything was wrong. They weren't in the channels when the alerts fired, and they didn't regularly check the database health metrics dashboard. Why would they? Ultimately, we lost valuable time finding that console job, which could have been spent investigating the root cause of the issue itself. And the poor engineer felt incredibly guilty for having expanded our deteriorated time for maybe 15 minutes, even though really they'd done nothing wrong. Everyone came out feeling stressed and pretty frustrated. During an incident, it can be tempting to focus purely on resolving the thing that's broken. And writing lengthy status updates can be seen as a waste of time. The really bad part here is that as an incident becomes more severe, responders become more stressed, and this actually gets worse rather than better. But this attitude doesn't take into account all the benefits of communicating clearly during an incident. Communication is what allows everybody else to make informed decisions. Maybe that's working out whether they should jump in and help, or tell you about something that they think could be related. What if they've made a change like 3 hours ago, that if someone told them the database was sad, they'd go, oh yeah, I think that might have been me. Perhaps that's making sure they don't make another change that's going to exacerbate the problem, like our poor engineer running the backfill. And maybe it's getting pretty intense and someone needs to go and buy a bunch of sandwiches to keep everyone going. Whatever it is, if you keep them in the dark, they don't stand a chance of making good choices. And as we saw at Atlassian, this kind of communication also builds empathy and understanding for the people on the other side. We'll talk about that more later. Before I was an engineer, I used to work in consulting for a company called Accenture. And I was on a project with a client who was notoriously tough, hard to deal with. I represented our team at the weekly update meeting and talked through what had happened during the week and where we were against our goals. And one week, someone in the team that I was running made a mistake, and it lost us a couple of days on a really time-sensitive part of the project. So I turned up to the weekly update meeting, pretty nervous, and delivered the bad news. I gave a pretty detailed explanation of what had happened, why that lost us time, and then what steps we'd taken to be confident that we wouldn't make the same mistake again. I was honest, and I put my hands up. We'd screwed up here, and that meant that our project was going to be delayed by a couple of days, and it was our fault, no one else's. In the same meeting, there was another supplier with a similar problem, but he was evasive when the client tried to find out more. He either didn't understand what had actually gone wrong or wasn't willing to discuss it. And our client grew increasingly frustrated, almost to the point of being angry. They asked more questions. How do you know this won't happen again? What happens if there are further delays? How confident are you that you can meet the new deadline? Transparency breeds trust. It can be tempting to believe that admitting to a mistake makes you look foolish or not good enough at your job, when in fact, the opposite is often true. When you're open about your mistakes, people trust that what you're saying is true, because why would you lie about something that you've done wrong? You can build a relationship, fallible human to fallible human, and work together to deliver value. Our meeting with the client ended abruptly as we were kicked out of the meeting room. The client was unhappy and asked the other supplier to send them a detailed report of exactly what had happened, exactly what steps had been taken to prevent similar issues in the future, and a detailed kind of flow of how they were going to hit their new deadline. We did not receive a similar request. That meant that while we were busy getting on with the next task, the other supplier was having to gather information and write all of this documentation to really make the client feel better. And in all likelihood, that's really all that document achieved. I don't think it made the supplier any more or less likely to deliver on time the next time. Trust is what gives you breathing room to fix what's actually broken. Rather than spending lots of time persuading people that you're doing the right thing, i.e. building trust, you can invest that effort into whatever it is that you're supposed to be doing. And the only way that you can get that trust is by being transparent with whoever it is that is impacted by whatever has gone wrong. The flip side is just as bad. When teams don't trust each other, incidents become this black hole that sucks more and more people into them. As each new team is impacted or finds out, they too want to have a seat at the table so that they can make sure that it's managed correctly and that their interests are represented. We've all been in the situation where someone with not much context is trying to give you advice, but really all they're doing is getting in the way. That normally happens because they don't trust you to make a decision without them. When you communicate clearly, it's easier for others to understand the problem and make good choices about when it will be useful for them to contribute, and also when it might not be very useful. Trust builds influence. As engineers, our impact is often limited by our ability to change behaviors. And this is particularly true if you're on a platform team or another team that delivers value to internal stakeholders. Perhaps you want to encourage some other teams to use a new tooling that you've built or a new pattern. Or maybe you've had a security near miss and you need to refocus and prioritize application security for a bit. If other teams don't think you're good at what you do, or don't think your goals are aligned with theirs, these initiatives become almost impossible to deliver. On the flip side, when people trust you, they'll take your advice much more readily, and you'll be able to influence their decisions and behavior. That influence is what allows you to be bigger than the sum of your parts, by having teams working together, contributing to shared goals. When things go wrong, people are challenged and often stressed. But it's also the perfect opportunity to build relationships. My strongest relationships, both at work and in my personal life, have been forged in one way or another in times of adversity. Being transparent when things are going wrong, taking the time to explain to somebody why we failed and what you've done as a result, pays real dividends. So, what can we do to foster a transparent culture? It's really important to remember that transparency is not a human default. When things go wrong, we all experience fear. Is something bad about to happen? Has it already? Could the company be in trouble? Am I in trouble? Could I get fired? And even once that initial fear has subsided and it's clear the sky isn't falling, there's still fear left over. Did I mess up here? What did people think of me? Am I bad at my job? What are people saying about me behind my back? What if people stop listening to what I say or stop trusting my judgment? Humans feel shame incredibly acutely. Evolutionarily speaking, we're not built to survive on our own. We need to be part of a group. And you can see a lot of punishments throughout history that have exploited this, whether it's being put in the stocks or made to wear a dunce hat in class. We might like to think that we've outgrown those instincts, but there's a lot of evidence that suggests that that's just not true. And this is what makes it so uncomfortable to admit your mistakes and be honest about what's happening. Every bone in your body is screaming, telling you to be afraid of the consequences, afraid of what your peers will think. And yet, most of the time, the opposite is true. Being honest, holding your hands up, admitting your mistakes, explaining what's happening, it's probably going to build you social capital, not lose it. People will respect you more for being honest and trust you going forwards. We need to make sure that everyone feels comfortable admitting to their mistakes, being open when things go wrong. But this won't happen on its own. We need to intentionally build a blameless culture. So the first thing is to be explicit. Talk about blamelessness, what it means for your company, for your team, for your individuals. Explain it in your onboarding materials, how you think about blame and what it is good for, or more importantly, what it isn't. Now, of course, writing something down isn't enough, but don't underestimate the impact of having these stuff as written values. When things get rough, I've often found myself using a company principle as a shield that helps me to empower me to speak up about something that I didn't agree with. Pass out materials, maybe a recording of this talk, or the numerous great articles that have been written on the subject, and maybe even write it on the walls. You never know, it might help. The best teams succeed together and fail together. It's very rare that something is solely one person's fault. Technology is usually more complicated than that. Just got one last story for you. A junior engineer is working on a new feature that sends emails to customers who aren't paying, asking them to set up their billing. Their code isn't quite right, and it actually emails all the customers who are paying. They deploy their code to staging and they run it, just as they've been told to do as good practice for this kind of feature, to understand the infrastructure implications. Suddenly, customer support are inundated with questions. Why are you asking me to pay when I'm already paying? Is something wrong? Do I need to update my billing details? The team gets involved. They write some comms to tell support what's happened, that it's all a misunderstanding, and the support team gets to work responding to the confused customers. The junior engineer is mortified. How have they made such a foolish mistake? They've emailed all these people. It turns out that the staging environment had recently been seeded with production data to enable some load testing that another team wanted to do. They wanted to load test on production shaped data because they'd been burned in the past by using generated data that returned misleading results. This isn't the junior engineer's fault, not really. This has happened because a number of mistakes conspiring together to this unfortunate outcome. Why was staging seeded with production data? Why wasn't that data anonymized? Should staging be set up to send unlimited emails to arbitrary email addresses? When something like this happens, it's really important to take accountability as a group, rather than leaving it with a junior engineer, or even taking it personally as a more senior team member. It doesn't mean everything is fine. Something bad has happened, and we need to learn from it. But we'll do that as a team together. And the last thing here is to lead from the front. When anyone joins a company, they're heavily influenced by the people around them, particularly senior folks or those who've been at the company for a long time. As one of those people, you're in a unique position to set an example. Shout about the mistakes that you make. It'll help shatter the illusion of perfection. And be really careful about how you talk about other people's mistakes. War stories are popular. I've used a few in this talk, and they're a nice way to tell company stories and laugh about the past. But it's a delicate balance. Try not to mock people involved in past incidents. Talk about it in terms of teams, not individuals. And don't ever be mean. Even if it's to a good friend, someone you know wouldn't mind and would get the joke. It sets the wrong tone for the rest of the organization. What if I make a mistake? What if the next story is about me? So here are a few key takeaways to wrap us up. First of all, transparency isn't the default. You'll need to work hard to encourage it. It's not just in incidents, it's about everything that we do. And being honest with ourselves and our teams is what will allow us to build trust. If you can foster a transparent culture, you can build trust with your stakeholders. And that's what enables you to deliver value as a group and be better than the sum of your parts. And if you're building trust, you can use that trust to ship real value for your customers. And really, that's kind of why we're all here. So thanks so much for listening. If you found this interesting or want to chat more about incident response and culture, I'm on Twitter, if it's still there, or in the Slack community that we've got at incident.io/community. And for anyone who's at Glovo, we've also got a shared Slack channel. So yeah, I hope you really enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks so much for having me. And if you've got any questions, fire them away.